Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And this week, in our mini episode, we're going to continue our conversation about the different types of chokes in jiu-jitsu. In the last mini episode, and I definitely recommend you listen to that one first. If you didn't, I'll put a link in the show notes. We talked about blood chokes. This is the, most classic way to think of choking someone in jiu-jitsu, where you put pressure on both carotid arteries in their neck and cut off blood to their brain, which puts them to sleep. So go back and listen to that episode first if you haven't already. I'll put a link in the show notes. That said, today, air chokes are the topic. There's two types of air chokes. The first type is where you put pressure on someone's trachea or windpipe and you cut off their ability to breathe. The second way is where you cover their mouth, which achieves the same thing. So examples of these include the variant of the guillotine, where you've got the blade of your wrist digging into their windpipe and they can't breathe. Another example would be covering their mouth, or the smother. These are examples of cutting off their ability to inhale air. You're not putting them to sleep by cutting off the oxygen to their brain via their blood, but you are denying them the ability to take in oxygen, which is going to prevent them from breathing, and eventually it's going to get the submission. Now, I talked about the guillotine earlier. Let's bring this up. Often, you're not using a single choking mechanic to choke someone. With the guillotine, there's a lot of variants of that are primarily blood chokes. There's also variants that use a combination of blood and air, and that's not a bad thing. We'll talk about that later in a future episode, how you mix up the different types of choking mechanics. So there is some flexibility here, but in general, blood chokes mean pressure on the carotid, air chokes mean can't breathe through my mouth or my nose. With that said, let's talk about some of the things that make air chokes a little bit unique and different from blood chokes. One thing is that air chokes tend to take a bit longer to finish. If I put pressure on your carotid arteries and I cut off blood flow to your brain, you're going to go to sleep really quick. You can normally put someone out in a few seconds if you've got the choke set up properly. In the case of air chokes, though, you are relying on the person's ability to hold their breath. How long can they hold their breath? That's ultimately going to dictate how long can they survive before they have to tap out. Now, there's a lot of other factors involved as well. There is a psychological element to an air choke. You can induce a degree of panic, which may make people tap faster than they would if they were just holding their breath. But generally speaking, with an air choke, unless you've really scared the person, they may be able to hang in there a little bit longer than with a blood choke. The other thing that we need to think about with an air choke is safety. With every submission, there is the possibility of injuring your opponent. We always want to avoid that in training, and we want to understand exactly what kinds of injuries can occur so that we can avoid the things that would lead to those injuries. In the case of a blood choke, we always have to bear in mind that pressure on the carotid arteries can damage the carotid arteries. There is the possibility of inducing stroke with a blood choke. With an air choke, the main risk is going to be damage to the windpipe or trachea. Again, there's different types of air chokes. If I'm doing a smother, I probably don't have to worry about that. But if I'm doing a choke where I'm compressing the windpipe, there is the possibility that I could injure my opponent. And so we want to bear that in mind when we're thinking of the amount of force that we apply and the way that we do these techniques. When you're in the gym training with your friends, you want to be making sure that any taps you get, you're getting because you have a choke on. You don't want to be getting taps because your training partner is afraid that you're going to break their windpipe. So that's something to think about when we think about how we use this technique safely in the gym. Because air chokes can take a little bit longer than some blood chokes, what we need to bear in mind is the amount of force that we're using. We don't want to burn our muscles out before we complete the choke. Another thing that I want to take a second to talk about is whether air chokes are dirty or clean techniques. In my generation, we were told that air chokes are dirty and that blood chokes were clean. The idea is that blood chokes are good technique, as if there's something better about the way that we submit someone when we cut off blood flow to their brain versus when we cut off their air intake. The idea was that if you're doing an air choke, there must be something dirty or incomplete about your technique and you just haven't mastered that properly. I want to dispel this here. Air chokes are no dirtier than blood chokes. That is just a bit of dogma. If you can submit someone with a technique that is legal under the rule set, that is a good technique. And so we need to bear that in mind when we're talking about air chokes. If you get a guillotine on someone and they tap and then they notify you after the fact that, hey, just so you know, that was an air choke, that's their problem. That's not your problem. It's just as valid as if you went for a blood choke. It's not that air chokes are bad or worse than blood chokes. It's that they're just a different type of submission, and it's okay to use both of these. So don't fall into the trap that I fell into of thinking that air chokes were somewhat dirty, and because my chokes have an element of an air choke in them, that it's somehow bad and it means my technique is lacking. That's just the way it's going to be sometimes. And as long as you're getting the submission, as long as you have control, and as long as what you're doing is legal under the rule set, there's no such thing as a dirty technique. Some types of chokes are also very hard to complete without an element of an air choke involved. The guillotine is a perfect example. It is possible to do a guillotine that is mostly a blood choke, but usually when you put someone in a guillotine, they're going to be tapping because of the pressure on their windpipe and because they can't breathe. It's not just because their carotids are cut off. So especially with guillotines, if people are telling you that was a windpipe choke, again, that does not mean this was bad technique. If you were able to do the technique safely and get the tap against a good opponent, what you did was probably fine technique. Now, there is one cool thing to talk about with air chokes, which is that although they do sometimes take longer to complete than blood chokes, there are ways to do air chokes that get taps really, really quick. And it's not always just about damage and making people fear that their windpipe is going to break. You can do air chokes in a certain way that triggers the gag reflex, and this makes it very difficult for people to hang in there and fight through it. Where this especially comes up is with the guillotine choke. What you want to do, it's not just about pressure on their windpipe, but if you use the blade of your wrist to actually dig into their windpipe, you can trigger that gag reflex, make people feel like they'll want to throw up. When that happens, that is going to make it very difficult for people to hang in there. I don't know exactly the science behind it, but if you've ever had this done to you, it feels like you're getting really faint-headed. It feels like you're going to have to tap out, and that can take effect very quick, even though this isn't a blood choke. So always look for a way to trigger that gag reflex. You want to find that part of the person's throat, and you want to really dig into that, trigger that gag reflex, and you can close off and finish an air choke much faster than if you're just trying to put pressure on their windpipe. The other thing to bear in mind, and I mentioned this earlier, is that air chokes sometimes can take a bit of time to apply, so be patient with them. Don't be trying to use all of your force right away, because then you can burn your arms out and the person might escape the choke. Also remember, if you have someone in a choke, even if you think, I'm not going to be able to finish this, there's still other benefits that you can get from having someone in a chokehold that's a little bit far away from being finished. One is you can tire the other person out and psychologically damage them, but the other thing too is you can use chokes as a great opportunity to improve your position. If you have someone in a chokehold, even if it's not the tightest, they have to respond to that threat, because if they don't, you're going to be able to cinch up that choke and you're likely going to be able to finish them at some point. So when a person is defending the choke and they've got their hands in, you can use that as an opportunity to sweep them or advance position. That's a great time to do so, because while their hands are occupied defending the choke, you can move on to other things. So there you have it, a foundation for using air chokes more effectively in jiu-jitsu. And if there's a closing thought I have for you here, it's don't fall into this mental trap of thinking that blood chokes are clean and air chokes are dirty. If it works and is legal within the rule set, don't be afraid to use it as a technique. Hope all of that helps. If you didn't already do so, I recommend listening to the prior mini episode we did on blood chokes. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as an article we've got on our website where we talk about choking mechanics in detail. If you want more, everything we make, from the podcast, both the main episodes to the mini episodes, our newsletter, BJJ Mental Models Premium, it all lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. I want to thank everyone for listening to these episodes and supporting us over the years. I hope you're getting value out of these. I definitely get value out of making these for you. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.